Welcome to JPod. This is a podcast on journalism. I am your host, Krishna Prasad. This is a podcast dealing with journalists and journalism, more specifically Indian journalists and Indian journalism in the season of coronavirus. And as you can see, this virus, the pandemic has really affected Indian media in a huge way already in the last 15, 20 days. And we've done a few episodes and got a perspective of how things are also across the world, not just in India. And joining me today is the legendary Prem Panicker, the man on whom Rediff.com in a sort of way was really built on through his cricket reporting, a feature writer of great standing, the former managing editor of Yahoo in India, and of course a very fine voice on journalism at all times. Prem, great to see you, and it's wonderful to hear your thoughts on this whole thing. What are you making of it sitting where you are?
Well, thanks for having me on in the first place. Uh, I think the problem I'm facing is look, uh, physical newspapers are pretty much uh, unavailable.
Yeah.
At least in the area that I live, you have to walk about 1.5 kilometers before you can actually find them. So you're stuck with the internet, and that is when the problem of reportage actually comes into stark relief. Because
Yes.
what we're getting is coverage that is pretty much a mile wide and a millimeter deep.
Just one sec before you say that. I mean, are you saying that sitting in Bangalore on this day, the April, whatever it is, 10th or 11th, you're still not being delivered newspapers, although they have technically eased up?
Yeah, we're not getting them. I
And that's
think
because your apartment block is not allowing it or your vendor is not delivering it?
no. See the vendor who delivers the newspapers, all he does is newspapers, right?
Yeah.
So those kind of shops they haven't allowed anyone who is not dealing in what the police think are essential commodities.
Oh, I see. I
Yeah.
see.
So
Uh,
all these small shops, the
uh,
cops keep going around and shutting them down. It's not just newspapers. It's also even things like, for instance, if you have a small shop selling only vegetables,
right.
uh, pretty much a cart and thing.
Right.
These days complain that cops either try to shut them down or ask them for bribes.
I
So a lot
see.
of people have opted out of this thing and said, "Look, we'll just keep it shut."
I see. So
Uh,
nobody in your apartment block gets newspapers.
Well, if the delivery happens, we have no problem because Swiggy delivers. There are other deliveries coming in. We just make sure that it is left downstairs at security. Then security gives us a call. We go down and we pick it up.
Correct.
So we don't have the distancing issue. What we have is the lack of supply issue. So the only place where you actually get newspapers here is if you go to shops that also sell other things like grains and milk and
Yeah.
things like that. There are a couple of such shops, but like I said, it's a walk, and it kind of defeats the purpose if you have to go out every morning and walk around in a narrow street.
Yeah. I don't know if you saw Naresh Fernandez's beautiful tweet a couple of days back. He put up a picture of a newspaper stall in Bombay, in Bandra, where he lives, and that
Mhm.
is originally a newspaper stall, and all they are selling now are vegetables. And Naresh was telling me that somebody had posted a really fantastic caption for that picture, saying that only mint is available now.
Oh, that is perfect. Yeah.
I thought that was a very smart line to say. But yeah, but I was speaking to a top newspaper executive yesterday, and my God, the picture they paint is so horrific. I mean, he was saying that newspaper circulations in most cities for his group is down by 70%, 60 to 70%.
Yeah.
And he's that kind of clawing back slowly, but he expects to lose at least 10% from its original highs in all the cities, which is of course a big number. But anyway, that's a aside. But that's where we are. Anyway, you're saying that therefore that in the absence of these newspapers, you're now depending on the internet, which you said is a inch deep and a mile wide. Yeah, go on.
Yeah. So even earlier you kind of depended on the internet a lot because normal reading practice would be that in the morning you go through the newspapers uh,
Hmm.
as a sort of quick summary and a broad overview of the last 24 hours, and then you went on the net to catch up with the latest developments and stuff.
Hmm.
Now you suddenly go on the internet, and even if you go site by site, which is what I do,
Yeah.
what I find is that reporting is falling into two categories. One, it is scattershot, like I said.
Hmm.
So depending on where you have people, you report from that area, or depending on what everybody else is reporting, you report on the same area. Like for instance, on any given day, the Tablighi story you will find about several dozen.
Yeah.
But India is a vast country, and I keep looking for news from some of the areas from some of the less reported states, and
Hmm.
it's very difficult to find it. You have to go to places like, say, the News Minute, for instance, which covers the south decently.
Hmm.
But what is the equivalent for the north?
Hmm. Hmm.
Then you have to
ANI. ANI.
yes, that's
Hmm.
that's part of the problem. See, I do follow the ANI feed, and the problem is first I have to read the ANI feed, then I have to read the other feeds to see which stories have been contradicted.
Hmm.
So it's kind of getting to be just parsing this and getting a broad overview. I was reading this Kelly McBride's. She had done this reporting on coronavirus kind of tip sheet for
Hmm.
Pointer. And
Hmm.
one of the things she started is that every time you cover this, start with a graph of the latest position
Hmm.
in the geography that you're covering. So if it's a national paper, what is the latest national position? How does it break down and stuff like that? Which is important because everything that you're reading has to have some kind of frame and context, and I don't think that is happening. So it's becoming very difficult to sort of get an overall picture.
No, this you're saying for online?
I'm saying, yeah, considering that I'm
No,
I'm
yeah.
pretty much dependent on online.
Yeah. No, so from my experience, what I find is that some newspapers like the New Indian Express in Madras,
Right.
more so Hindustan Times in Delhi, and also somewhat the Indian Express, they seem to be doing pretty good graphic work. Especially New Indian Express has had some superb graphics, giving a really fine picture both nationally and globally. And of course, it's not the same thing as the New York Times, which 3 days ago had a graph from every country on earth, you know.
Correct. Yes.
But so that's not quite the same scene. But I think the graphs continue to be there. I don't know what kind of graph you're looking for.
No, no. So I'm not saying that none of these things exist. So one of the problems is that when you make a statement like that, saying
Hmm.
that it's fairly difficult to get information,
Hmm.
you are comparing it with a situation where information was available at a glance. Here you have to go looking for it. Is my
Yeah.
point. So
But
if
isn't that
if
inherent to
reading
the?
a story on one news site which talks about, let's say, a particular area,
Yeah.
I then have to, and I agree with the sources that you're talking about, particularly the New Indian Express. They've been doing very well on that front.
Hmm.
I then have to open up another browser to go check that. So it's, I suppose, for the casual reader, it is like, okay, this is the information they're giving me. I'm good enough.
Yeah.
But if you're
No, but isn't that
reading
intrinsic to
with
this new
intent,
medium, where you pick and choose what you want to read? Therefore, it makes sense that, I'm only interested in what's happening in Mysore or you're in Bangalore. I mean, I'm talking of lay readers. You know, are
correct.
they are they looking for this global picture, the lay reader?
Well, one of the things, I mean, you've been in the same position as I have. In fact, we've worked together across multiple websites.
Yeah.
Eh, Now there is something. There are two ways of looking at this. One is what is the reader? What does the reader want? And every time that question comes up in a news conference or whatever, my argument used to be, which reader are you talking about?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
there is no one thing called a generic reader. So then the editorial thinking comes into the mix, and we say what is important for people to know,
Yeah.
which dictates all our decisions, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Uh, Here the problem is that, yeah, I agree with the point about I might be interested in Bangalore, particularly maybe the Alsur area where I'm living, because I want to know how to navigate this lockdown and what is happening and is it safe to go out and stuff like that.
Mm.
But the presumption that that is all I want to know is what I'm arguing against.
Mm. Mm.
Uh, Local journalism, what I find surprising is that there are tons and tons of research, and every year, places like Pointer and the Reuters Institute of Journalism and all of that bring out these statistics based reports on
Mm.
what is working, what is not. And
Mm.
almost invariably, they find that broad overviews plus local and hyperlocal coverage is what is working.
Correct.
And in the real world, what you find is that hyperlocal coverage has never been attempted over here in the first place.
Mm.
With the exception probably of somebody like, say, Gangadhar Patil, who does that 101 reporters
Mm.
thing. But where do you go looking for his content, right? That is one part of the problem. Local coverage is incredibly scattershot.
Mm.
It's not whether the locality is worth covering so much as do I have somebody there or not. And that goes into that takes you into the position of finances, how various newsrooms are managing their finances, which areas they're laying off staff from.
Mm.
Local coverage is one of the first areas to be affected. The second one is beat reportage, which is
Yeah.
another reason why you're struggling to find this broad overview, because there are very few journalists on the health beat per se.
Mm. Mm.
Earlier, we used to have these were considered important beats: health, environment, all of those. You would have specialists who keep following up these stories. Now it is like everybody is a generalist.
Yeah.
And so, if we were working in a newsroom today, very likely that you would be asked to do a piece on whether hydrochloroquine is a good drug. And what the hell do I know about medicine?
Mm. Mm. Mm.
So, these kind of issues have started impacting on. You earlier said that a top newspaper executive was talking about the decline of his print circulation, and that almost 70% bleed.
Mm.
I've been thinking about that, and I was thinking, once this lockdown is over, and even when the supplies come regularly, there are a lot of people who are going to go, look, I survived without this. I don't think I need it.
Yeah, I know exactly the point my friend is making, which is that he expects to lose 100%, at least 10% circulation, right?
Yeah.
Which is a huge thing given the size of their group. But I suppose this comes with the territory. I mean, print has been having this kind of periodic chops now and then. First digital, then television, then demonetization, then GST, then this. So we've seen in print continuously this kind of a periodic attack. But this one in particular, as you said rightly, I think conveys the fact to the reader that I've survived for 15, 20 days without newspapers. I'm okay with it. So why do I need it once again? I think that's a very good point. But I'm not so sure the answers are so clear yet.
Well, now it gets into the other territory. I mean, why? How do you run a newspaper? You've got to make it viable at some level. It has to
Hmm.
be financially viable, or at the very least, self-supporting. Nobody starts publishing a newspaper thinking that they're going to make enormous profits.
Yeah.
All the money really comes in from the peripherals, right? The real estate and various other things. You know how it works. You work
Hmm.
for
Hmm.
three
Yeah.
business houses that had newspapers and thing. But one of the issues that we've had in not recent times, at least for a decade, probably more, is that there is this very odd thing that is happening. The readership is moving online, and it needs mentioning that mostly we are talking about the English language press.
Hmm.
But to an extent, you can see that even in the regional language press. For instance, I was talking to somebody from Malayalam Manorama some time back, and they were also seeing that shift, that
Hmm.
people are moving from the physical paper to the online space. That
Hmm.
is the readers.
Hmm.
In fact, if you drive through Kerala, I was in Kerala for 15 days each, both in October and November, as I was working on some project.
Hmm.
And one of the things that struck me was when I was growing up, or even when in my 30s, 40s, and all that, you could drive through any street in Kerala and you would find at least one newspaper vendor.
Right.
Uh, Today, you actually have to go looking.
Hmm.
And this is in Trivandrum, for instance,
Hmm. Hmm.
where I drove down several streets. deliberately looking for a news vendor and couldn't find one, which is what led to this conversation in the first place. And they were saying, yeah, a lot of people have gone digital. Now, the audience is moving digital, but the money is not following.
You see,
So,
there is a rider to that, which is that if you speak to newspaper executives, you will learn both in the south and in the north that they're not having big trouble in distributing newspapers in the what we call upcountry areas. You don't
correct.
have problems in the upcountry areas.
Yeah,
Where newspapers and magazines are having a problem is really in the so-called literate, educated, upper middle class or middle class areas where all these RWA uncles kind of, jump in and stop circulation, fearing contamination. So it seems to be that in the rural areas or mofussil areas, as we used to call it once upon a time, it seems to be possible to circulate newspapers, which is why you find many of these newspapers now coming out with a very skimpy 12-page, 14-page, 8-page edition, because they can serve those areas. But as you rightly said now, before we got into this, that these are not catchment areas in terms of revenue. This is not where you make money by selling ads, or this is not where companies are located to, give you ads. So,
exactly.
so therefore, you are serving to a population which for whom products are not the most important thing. News is, but it's not working the same way in the cities.
Yeah, true. And so it's a double whammy, right? And that actually goes to why reporting is also getting affected. It becomes a vicious cycle because you're not serving the areas where advertising is likely to come your way.
Hmm.
You're losing revenue. When you lose revenue, the first thing you do is cut costs, and the first cost you cut, for some reason, it is never the sales force, it is never the brand marketing people, it is always the reporter.
Yeah,
So increasingly over the year, and this has been happening. It's not just coronavirus. Coronavirus is accelerating a process, a problem that we've had for quite some time.
of course.
But what is actually happening is that the less reporters you have, the more generalists you need,
Yeah, yeah,
which which basically means that somebody who knows nothing about anything
yeah.
is preferred to somebody who knows a lot about one particular thing.
Hmm, hmm, hmm. Yeah. But I mean, I've been thinking, of one large thing, which is where I started this podcast from. The broad point is now that, of course, with the entry of the internet, readers have been going away, and that's been happening for about 15, 20 years now. But I think every single big thing really makes print journalism more or less irrelevant to the reader, you know. And that used to be the case, but now when I see the kind of reactions I see from people around me, it seems to be as if people seem to suggest that they can survive without journalism. It's good to talk of deep dive reporting in the local areas and this and that, but the more you listen to people, I mean, the more it seems as if they're just, they think as if the world revolves around them and it's just them that is important. They just don't seem to be more, I mean, Marshall McLuhan talked of the global village, but the more the internet expands, the more each one of us becomes an island. We are least bothered with people around us, or less bothered with people around us, or things besides us.
Which is true, and which is going to be inevitable. And actually, that's a good point. That the yeah, the more our vistas broaden, the more we sort of insulate, because who in the hell can wrap their heads around something that is so vast and so broad.
Hmm.
Eh, all that said, the people who say we can get along without the media, we can get along without news,
Hmm.
they are the very people who it is not that they can get along without knowing what's going on. It is that
Hmm.
they think that the alternate sources of information that they have, which is Twitter and Facebook and the famous WhatsApp,
Yeah.
is enough for their informational needs. Two things they don't get.
Hmm.
One, the news that you get from these sources are heavily filtered through various bubbles, which we know about. And secondly, a lot of the news is in any way coming from the media.
Absolutely.
But so when they say, why do we need media houses? your information stream will just die down, and sooner or later, actually, this is a good time for people to introspect and say, really understand the value of having good media. It's also funny. In the last couple of days, I've been reading about two different trends in the US. One is local newspapers shutting down, and this goes to your point about you can cover local areas, but you cannot monetize it.
Hmm.
So there is a trend of local newspapers shutting down en masse,
Hmm.
and people actually crowdsourcing to help the reporters who have suddenly gone out of jobs. And
Yeah.
then there is the equal trend of the big media houses, even unexpected media houses like Atlantic, for instance.
Hmm.
Nobody would have ever thought of the Atlantic as a news purveyor. It is more, features and opinion and essays and stuff like that. But
Yes. Yes.
Atlantic is probably the one that has benefited the most from their coronavirus coverage.
Hmm. 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 Hmm.
So there is this little dichotomy between people saying that they don't want news, and at the same
Hmm.
time going more and more towards places where they think they are getting broad, comprehensive content. And this
Oh,
argument about whether long form or detailed reporting works or not, we've had this for, I think we've been part of several meetings where these kind of things were discussed. Remember?
yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
No, but I think the difference is that we can't come to any great conclusions about Atlantic or any other publication at this juncture only for one reason, which is that you now have a captive audience. The audience is now sitting at home, trying to fill up those 15, 20 hours it's awake. And it's trying to do that in many different ways. And perhaps somewhere the Atlantic fits into the picture. I mean, I know friends of mine who tell me that, their website circulation, I mean, readership has gone up twofold and threefold and so on.
mhm.
But this is a very unnatural situation to be drawing conclusions from that, because I'm talking of newspapers in India, where papers say we're doing 2x and 3x in terms of readership online. That's because they were not able to print those newspapers and not able to circulate. So therefore, this is a captive situation where you're seeing greater digital use and greater social media use. I saw a number for social media saying 298% up or something.
Mhm.
So therefore, I'm not sure that we can come to some clear conclusions, especially in the Indian context, that because viewership has gone up or circulation has gone up, that this is going to stay forever. It's certainly going to go in that direction. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, I mean, because one of the unintended consequences of the internet is that newsroom conversations are now all about data and Excel sheets and stuff like that. One of the things that I remember from many management meetings, particularly in Yahoo, but also earlier when we were together in Rediff and all of that, is you look for these opportunities where there are natural spikes. But when you
Hmm.
see it happening, and it could happen not because of something excellent that you've done, but like you said, external circumstances, in this case, people looking for ways to spend their spare time.
Yeah.
One of the things you do when you spot a spike is immediately see how to translate that spike
Yeah.
into ongoing loyalty once this spike period is over. So
Of course.
you don't use numbers like some kind of mathematical formula, but if you get 100% spike, and if you can retain 30 to 40% of that spike post the spike
Correct.
period itself, that
Hmm.
is how you grow.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this could well be a windfall. The problem is that I don't see too many media houses that are actually thinking of this as an opportunity to build that kind of brand loyalty with consistent, you know, content and with the proof of concept that we are vital to your needs.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that kind of
No.
thinking doesn't seem to happen. It's like wake up in the morning and oh, okay, what do we do today?
Yeah. No, but of course, these are extraordinary times. Everyone is working very independently, sitting at home, making phone calls. The usual meetings that take place in newsrooms is not happening. So therefore there is some degree of a vacuum in terms of leadership and guidance, I presume. Although I think some newspapers are doing a terrific job in the circumstances, especially Delhi-based newspapers, Express, Hindustan Times, Times of India, in their own ways, I think have been quite heroic in their coverage. I mean, look at the situation of a good Delhi reporter. You know, if you are an honest reporter in Delhi newspapers or television, I mean, imagine what a wonderful time you've lived through. I mean, it sounds macabre, but you basically seen in the period of just 1 month, first the slaughter in Delhi, and then the mass migration, then this pandemic. It's an incredible time to be a good reporter in Delhi if you are an honest reporter. So I think all things considered, there is some pretty good whatever gumshoe reporting or shoe leather reporting or whatever they call it, some really good stuff happening, and I think we must doff our hats to that, all things considered. But I mean, the larger questions of course continue to remain and will remain after this. I think
Yeah, and in what you said just now, you used the word honest twice. So I
yeah.
just wanted to throw up this question:
Uh-huh.
how much of a welcoming atmosphere is this for honest reporting? Do you think?
No, yeah, I know the answer, but let's hear it from you. Yeah.
No, because I was looking at, for instance, in December there was this story, and one of the things with you made the point correctly that we've lived through times when every day seems to be a new disaster,
Yeah.
which basically means that you forget yesterday's disasters even faster. But
Yeah.
one of the things that I remember is that in December, there was this report that I read someplace that the Prime Minister's office has asked all the ministries to track and compile opinion pieces and columns on, particularly on cabinet decisions. The ministries
Yeah.
were supposed to summarize and to give feedback on whether these are shown in a positive or negative light.
Yeah. Yeah.
More recently, Delhi police asking for details of administration of the administrators of WhatsApp groups at hospitals, particularly Safdarjung.
Yeah.
Even
Yeah.
more recently, there was SG Tushar Mehta asking the Supreme Court to direct that no news other than that from official sources could be published.
Yeah.
So, on the
Yeah.
one hand, you have the government doing its level best to use this as an opportunity to further tighten its control on the media. You'd recently shared that long New York Times report about press freedom under Modi.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm genuinely, in awe of those reporters who are still doing their work, not just because they're putting themselves in harm's way. They did that during the riots. They did that during the protests. They did that during the migrant march, and now they're doing that during coronavirus.
Correct.
Unfortunately, the editors and publishers, particularly the publishers,
Hmm.
are creating conditions that are exactly inimical to this kind of reporting that we're talking about.
I'm not sure we can totally generalize across media platforms for this. I think we have to make a distinction between print, television, and digital, surely, to start
Correct.
with. And I think you will find greater honesty in terms of reporting, surely in print. There's no doubt about that because it's deliberative, you take some time, etc. And of course, on television, especially now, the so-called North Korean channels are all very happy doing the dishonest part of journalism, in the sense of creating hatred or putting out the certain point of view which will stereotype Muslims and so on. So I think there has to be a distinction here, and also more importantly, I think we can't generalize about publishers and editors and journalists at this juncture, because unless it's a story which is going to be critical of, let's say, Prime Minister Modi, or some action of the PMO, it seems to be all systems go in most publications. Really, I mean, it seems to be that that's the only no-go area, as far as I can see. Otherwise, if it does not kind of infringe on the so-called image of the Prime Minister, it seems to be that newspapers are okay doing the tough things. if you saw the migration stories in the Indian Express in Delhi, I thought they did a superb job.
Yes, they
I
did.
think,
Yeah.
but so therefore, that does not necessarily affect anybody's image. So till that point, they're pretty safe. Most newspapers, of course, even those basic stories, if you look at them in all the Hindi papers as I saw them, I mean, it's shocking. I mean, even those most basic stories about what the kind of distress this decision of imposing a so-called lockdown in 4 hours flat, the kind of havoc it had created amongst the migrants, among most of whom are Hindi speaking. If you saw the coverage of that issue in the Hindi papers, and I mean, by which I mean Dainik Jagran and
Right.
so on, it's quite shocking. It's quite shocking that newspapers are able to just pretend that this whole country is about some greater national interest. It's not as if the migrants matter. It's not as if hunger matters or sore feet matter. It just seems to be that these newspapers, many of them in the languages, actually, the languages is an issue we must really talk about because I think it's so sad and pitiable as we speak. It's quite shocking. But I mean to say, for someone who reads these papers, I was quite aghast to see the kind of coverage in many of these newspapers, painting all of these things in a very nationalistic tone, as if there was some great sacrifice that these migrants were making. So therefore, we have to make these distinctions. Hindi versus English, print versus electronic, PMO versus non-PMO. I think these distinctions matter. But at the end of the day, I mean, the languages is an issue. I don't know if you saw those two stories.
Mhm.
One which I myself blogged about,
Yeah.
which is the reaction of or rather the coverage of the interaction that the Prime Minister had with owners of print media. And I blogged about how each of those regional language newspaper walas had written or had been covered in their newspapers as if they were advising the Prime Minister
Yeah,
before
you're
the
talking about
lockdown.
the Indian Journalism Review
Yeah,
piece.
yeah.
Yeah.
So that is one. And then, of course, as a follow up to that was the caravan story, which spoke of how that meeting was really essentially used by the Prime Minister's office to kind of temper coverage. You know,
Correct.
so then when you see this kind of coverage after that interaction, then everything kind of falls into place in my mind. I mean, prejudiced as it may be.
Yeah, and that's kind of my point as well, and it also goes to something else that happened. The I was very amused by the fact that the Congress president
Hmm.
made 5 points
Hmm.
in her mail to Prime Minister Modi,
Absolutely.
and only one point got picked up, and there was this drumbeat of opposition right across. And in this case, I noticed that it was there in digital. I noticed it was there in print.
Yeah.
Um, the one point was government advertising being stopped.
Yeah.
Again, it's a bit of a gray area because coincidentally, at this point in the US, there's a debate going on about whether some of these stressed newspapers, particularly the smaller ones or media houses, the
Hmm.
smaller ones should accept federal funding,
Yeah.
and whether the mere fact that you take money from the government inhibits your ability to report on the government.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
Here, I don't think anyone is in any doubt whatsoever that government spending should not just continue but should ramp up.
Yeah.
Uh, the outrage that I saw, and even otherwise sane newspaper outlets, some of which you were mentioning, did editorials on the subject, saying what the hell is Sonia Gandhi talking about?
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, and I've never been able to understand or at least reconcile to myself the fact that newspapers or media houses are perfectly okay taking money from the very people they are supposed to be questioning.
Correct.
We used to have these debates when business houses were funding newspapers. Remember the Singhanias, the Ambanis, the Rahejas, and the
Yeah.
question was always, how do you cover these people if they need to be covered?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
here you're talking of the single biggest, you're talking of a government that A is using public money to
Hmm.
bribe newspapers. Literally, it is a bribe.
Hmm.
They are
That's a
also,
pretty strong.
sorry?
That's a pretty strong word. I said that we are being bribed.
Well, look, for instance, when the Kashmir lockdown happened, one of the first things that the government announced was that ads would be withdrawn to the local from the local Kashmiri newspapers.
Yeah,
So clearly, they're weaponizing the ability to advertise. And it
yeah,
needs mentioning that this is public funds that you're talking about. You're not talking about, whatever money the BJP is acquired through electoral bonds and various other avenues.
yeah, yeah.
So effectively, the government is using public money. It is using it in both ways. It is a carrot for those who toe the line, and it is a stick against those who don't.
Right.
The second revenue source that media houses have is the offline event, the conclaves that, I mean, it's like you wake up every day, there is a different conclave happening somewhere else.
Hmm.
Under
But with the
the,
same chief guest.
yeah, exactly. And these conclaves work only if the prime minister, the home minister, and certain other major ministers, Jay Shankar, the MEA, all of them are present, which is when it attracts advertising.
Yeah,
So either allowing their names, their faces, and their presence to be used to raise money or withholding that favor is the second means of coercion. And
yeah,
then, of course, you have the famous third option, which is filing cases. The UP government has filed a case against Wire, which I think Wire is about to set a record for the most number of cases filed against any media house
yeah,
uh, ever. You have the strange case of NDTV, which went all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court threw it out, and the government within an hour reimposed the case.
hmm. Hmm.
So, I mean, you are talking of a government that is not above using this opportunity, which is that the economic bottom line of media houses is stressed. There's
Hmm.
no question whatsoever about it.
Yeah,
And that is precisely when the government, which has the ability to spend whatever the hell it wants,
hmm.
is using that ability to
Hmm.
further control the kind of coverage that appears.
Yeah,
And for me, I mean, that's one of the single biggest dangers, and that is why I was both startled and upset when I saw the reaction to that one proposal of Sonia Gandhi's.
yeah. But with all of these things, as unfortunately it happens, the Congress has ruled this country for the longest time,
Yep.
and it's something the Congress has also done. It's also used advertising as a carrot and stick to start with. One, two, you can't compare Kashmir with this specific issue because Kashmir, even before all of this, has been the subject of such strictures. When I used to be in the press council, this case would often come up of advertising to newspapers in Kashmir, and I have seen myself lists before the abrogation of Article 370, long before all of that. I've seen lists prepared by the Home Ministry, which very clearly talk of cutting off newspaper advertisements to X, Y, or Z newspapers fully or partially, and so on. So that is the other distinction one needs to make, which is that in Kashmir, for so-called national security reasons or the national interest reasons, advertising has been routinely used as a tap. The third thing, which is more striking for me from this point which you bring up, is the intervention of the Indian Newspaper Society. The INS is a body of owners of the big newspapers.
Yes.
Although technically they have 600, 700 newspapers, something like that, on their rolls, it's largely run as a cabal of these big newspaper fellows. I'm in no doubt that the media needs help at this point of time. Print media, when I talk of media, I'm only talking print media. I do believe print media needs some help, but I'm not so sure that the big newspapers need that help, which is what this has become about. You have not seen these smaller newspaper organizations speak up in favor of against Sonia Gandhi's proposal. It's the big newspapers, and I was specifically and particularly troubled by the language of the Indian Express editorial yesterday. I thought it was pretty craven as an editorial, and I have conveyed that to them. But I thought it was a really poor editorial in the sense of equating, reality and turning it into a virtue. I mean, really, I mean, I know that many of these newspapers survive largely on government ads, But to think that that it's a matter of right that taxpayers' money which is given to the government comes back to private business houses, which are newspapers. I think that's a pretty warped circular logic to employ. So the short point is that the small newspapers do need some help. I think newspaper employees, magazine employees, especially small newspapers, small magazines, they do need some help. Because you can see salary cuts coming, you can see job cuts coming. So I think you need some help, unless you want a monopolized market, or a market dominated by the big players. You need to provide help. But I'm really surprised at the tone and tenor of some of these pieces, which is almost making the case for big newspapers to be run. I mean, what is the logic for Mukesh Ambani's media enterprises to benefit from government advertising?
Yeah,
What
see,
is the logic? What is the logic for the Times of India, which is the country's largest newspaper group, which makes 1,200 crores or whatever in terms of profits every year? What is the logic for them to receive government ads? I don't see that logic. And unfortunately, what you will find is that the most money goes to these big players. The small players don't benefit. So I am really perturbed about that. I do believe media needs some help, whether it is private help, public help, I don't know, but it needs some help. But this painting of Sonia Gandhi's issue and turning, she made some very fine points. She said, really stop the stupid 20,000 crore revamp of the Central Vista in Bangalore, so in Delhi. No one takes that up. No one takes up the fact that she says have a blanket ban on foreign travel for the prime minister and president and ministers. No one takes that up. It's almost as if this is the only issue on the table, and that I find troubling.
yeah. Actually, both of those were precisely where I was coming from. One, the fact that of the five, and let's face it, when compared with the Central Vista, or since you brought up foreign travel, there's also the 8,000 odd crore that has been sanctioned for two Boeing wide-body jets for the PM and President and VP. None of those were seen as issues. And also, your second point about it is the big media houses that are protesting or arguing against, government money. We made the point earlier that local coverage, hyperlocal coverage, is extremely important at this time. And if this kind of government advertising support was going to such media outlets, I'd literally stand up and cheer, because I mean that really is the need. At this point in time, I mean, much as I want to know what the national picture is, I also want to know what the particular locality picture is, or at least the state pictures.
Yeah.
And that is what I'm not getting. And it's not the fault. I don't think it is the fault of the media so much, because everybody is resourced out. And that is precisely why government intervention would work. But like you said, I mean, why government intervention for Ambani's group, or the Times group, or even the Express for that matter.
Yeah.
And I agree that Express editorial was particularly egregious.
Yeah.
In fact, when you told me that we would be doing this today, that's the first thought that came into my head, that it's a point worth raising. That, oh, by the way, Express, if I remember correctly, in the last 1 month also laid off quite a few employees.
No, layoffs is happening very quietly, very softly across the board. I know organizations which have, unbelievably let off people on just one parameter. If you have a CTC, and I'm talking of language newspapers, if you have a cost to company of 50,000 or more, you have been automatically told to go. Can you believe that? I mean, it's like you don't want any institutional memory, you don't want any experience. All you want is cheap staff filling up, crap. So I mean, this whole thing is going on. But let me just come back to this Sonia Gandhi issue a bit. I mean, of course, you can have great questions on Sonia Gandhi's political wisdom in making this point. Basically, she's automatically earned herself a lot of political enemies by suggesting a ban, media enemies by suggesting a ban on advertising automatically. So you wonder where the Congress, which is already in the dumps, is coming from. What kind of thinking went into it. The other thing about the Congress proposal is this, which is that it's, I mean, almost hypocritical. If you see the kind of money being pumped in by Congress governments, state governments, in media just now, it's quite amazing. The Hindu, for example, had a conclave in Bangalore. It's called the Huddle,
Yeah,
a
yeah.
couple of months back. And the primary sponsors were Chhattisgarh and Madhya Pradesh, both of which were at that point run by, I think, Chhattisgarh and Rajasthan, I think, okay, both
Yeah.
of which were then run by the Congress government. So the Congress seems to be also doing the same thing, and on the other hand,
Heavy.
yeah,
One point I wanted to make when I brought up the whole issue of Sonia Gandhi's proposals,
hmm,
something that I think is worth mentioning in this context is I'm not holding a brief for the Congress.
yeah,
Uh, in fact, I think they are as a lot of what we are seeing today is merely the industrialized version of policies and ways of functioning that the Congress institutionalized.
yeah, absolutely,
So it is not that I'm giving them a free pass.
yeah,
I'm merely saying that this at this point in time struck me as being the kindest way of putting some of the reactions that came. I think even the NBA had some kind of statement out, which also told the same lines.
hmm,
The kindest interpretation is that these people are tone deaf.
yeah. No, you see, the issue is a very simple one. The media is in trouble just now, print media and television media, no question. Uh, at this point, especially for print media, there is no advertising revenue and there's no circulation revenue. So the point really is, at the end of the day, there are hundreds of thousands of employees across the country, especially small towns, medium-sized towns, who are all, depending on journalism as a livelihood. And so therefore they need help. Where will it come from if private parties, which means retail advertisers, are not there to put in money, if readers are not there to put in money to subscribe, where is the help going to come from if your organization itself is not in great shape? So I think we need to also keep that in mind. We need to think of some safety net for journalists, which at this point in a country which is now so totally non-unionized, there is no safety net of any kind. For example, in the UK, the unions are pretty strong despite privatization. So therefore, there is a fallback. There is a fallback, but we don't have anything like that. You're out of a job, you're gone in Indian journalism.
Correct. And part of and one related aspect of that is that the managements of media, particularly the print media,
Hmm.
are not really looking at ways. I remember there's one thing that happened when I was in the US and working on India Abroad.
Yeah,
India Abroad had pretty much the same problems. We circulated in the East Coast, which basically meant in New York and New Jersey.
yeah,
And then you would have 10 subscribers sitting in Chicago and another 10 sitting somewhere else in Maryland or something, and just reaching the newspaper to them became an issue.
yeah, yeah,
It was cost ineffective, right?
yeah,
So one of the first things we had to do was worry about how are we going to reduce the expenses.
hmm.
We were, I mean, we were a small team in the first place, and there was no question of cutting that team any further.
Hmm.
We realized that just by trimming an inch
Hmm. Hmm.
of the paper size, we were saving something like $20,000 a month, $20,000 a week, and it
Yeah,
was
yeah,
at some point in time. I think print media has to think about its. Look, you've been in newspapers, you know these numbers, and I don't want to throw a lot of numbers into a podcast because it really makes no sense.
yeah,
But single biggest expense in running a media house, print media house, is newsprint and printing and distribution costs. It is not the journalist,
yeah. It's one third. Journalism costs about a third.
or a little less, yeah.
Hmm.
Uh, and but every time there are cuts, like you said, it is a journalist who gets it in the neck,
Hmm.
which is an extremely inefficient means of rationalizing your bottom, because you're not going to make a difference. You lay off two journalists, it doesn't help your bottom line at all.
Yeah. This
So
is this is a
my
point. This is
question
a
is,
point
who
I
is thinking about these things and who is working towards rationalization of expenses, trying to figure out how they're going to post this coronavirus, whenever it sort of goes away.
Yeah.
As you said right in the beginning, you're going to face the thing of people saying, look, I survived without the newspaper. What am I? why am I going back to it?
Yeah.
What are you going to do when it comes to that point of time? How are you going to sort of what's your plan B? Because plan A clearly is not working.
What do you suggest? You've been a fine digital journalist for so long. You run companies. What do you think, are the two, three things our journalists should be doing now? In terms of, I know that preparing for a digital future is a story which we've heard for so long. But at this juncture, what is it that you think they could be doing?
Are you talking of journalists or are you talking of
Yeah,
media houses?
let's talk of journalists for starters.
Journalists, I think, I mean, you are going into, and this is something that keeps coming up in the workshops that we do. Unfortunately, I don't particularly like it, but
Hmm.
unfortunately, we are going into a world where the generalist is preferred to the specialist.
Hmm.
And by generalist, it is not just being able to write anything about anything at all. It is also the ability to marry all forms of reporting. So the reporter who goes out also has to be able to shoot manageable or usable pictures.
Hmm.
They need to have some elementary skills in terms of data visualization.
Yeah.
I think journalists need to spend the time to upskill.
Yeah.
This business of I don't shoot pictures is not going to work. So
Hmm.
when I did that journalism, I think it was a semester at ACJ.
Hmm.
That was probably the one thing that I kept insisting on, that when they went out to do their assignments,
Hmm.
they came back with fully rounded digital stories.
Yeah.
And let's face it, if you do a graphic for a digital site, that
Yeah.
graphic is equally valid for a print site.
Yeah.
So specialization is, I mean, so generalization, meaning learning to use these new tools and technologies well is one. The
Hmm.
second would be even
No,
within.
that's too easy, Prem. Let's assume I'm 50 years old. Let's assume I've been in my newspaper for 25 years. And
Mhm.
let's assume I'm suddenly told to go because I have a CTC of more than 50,000.
Yep.
Okay. I still have 20 years of my life left in terms of just longevity. Okay.
Yeah.
What can I do at 50? There are many people like that.
Which is correct, and there is no easy answer. I mean, if there was an easy answer, I'd be doing it. Don't forget, I haven't worked since 2014.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
uh, what you can do probably is use. One of the things that I've noticed in the recent past is that a lot of very good journalists have moved off of being captive to a particular media house
Hmm.
and prefer to chase their own stories
Hmm.
and then uh, pitch to either Indian or international media houses. I'm talking of reportage. I'm not talking of the blah that goes from the so-called, Indian voices, which are
Yeah.
mandatory in places like NYT and Wash Post and all of that.
Hmm.
Uh, I think it's not a simple solution. It is not easily implementable.
Hmm.
But I think if you have those 20, 30 years worth of skills,
Yeah.
then going out and putting those skills to use,
Hmm.
it is not going to make you a lot of money,
Yeah.
but it is probably a lot better than
No,
the.
but again, you're talking of English. Let's assume I'm a Bengali journalist who's 50, who's female, who is earning 50,000 per month, who loses a job. What happens to me?
I wish I had the answer.
You know?
Seriously.
No, no. I
I
mean, of
mean,
course, one good thing would be if you had a bank balance, you're safe. But unfortunately, it's not
but
the case in language publications where they
so
pay
funnily
very
enough,
poorly.
KP, one of the things that I just discovered is that if you have a bank balance and then you have a bank balance and you've invested presumably, and then the stock market collapses for no reason of yours, your bank balance is gone to shit.
Yeah, or your government takes your money to give to newspapers for ads.
Exactly. So there is no real easy answer. I mean, do you then go with the argument that media should be a public service and therefore should be? You talked about the UK model, for instance.
Yeah. But newspaper is certainly a public service, no question.
Yeah,
It is.
it's not. It's not. however, being treated as a public service in terms of essential funding. Again, we get into this contradictory argument about government ads, are they good or bad?
Yeah.
I seriously wish I knew the answers. Uh, as far as language journalists have in any case suffered throughout. Even when they do have a job, they are underpaid, they're overworked, they're unnoticed,
Hmm.
except in their small limited circle. And then when they lose their job, it becomes much worse.
Hmm.
It also becomes the other part of the problem is that at least a very good English journalist, whether by choice or by circumstance,
Yeah.
finds herself out of a job, she can actually freelance and still make some kind of money if she's good enough.
Hmm.
The language journalist has no option because where are you going to freelance from? It is within that language, right?
But given your own experience with digital stuff, I keep hearing a lot of people suggest that these people who lose their jobs or who are too old to get a new job should go online and create an
Yes.
online profile and do Facebook Live and YouTube and this and that. Is that a viable option? Have you found that?
It is viable in this sense. One of the things that I notice is that media houses are increasingly not tuned to identifying, mentoring, and bringing up talent.
Hmm.
So when they need something, and it's also economically, it is also economically feasible that if I want a story,
Hmm.
I'd rather go to a freelancer because I just have to pay that person for that bit of work. I don't have to pay, wages and health insurance coverage and all the rest of it.
Hmm.
So now I'm an editor. I'm looking for a particular story from a particular geography
Hmm.
where I don't have a reporter.
Hmm.
Where do I find this person who is capable of delivering that story and delivering it quickly? The only means I have is to go online and check to see who is in that space.
Hmm. Hmm.
Again, this is one of the things that I've insisted on in pretty much every single workshop that I've
No,
done.
I'm asking a very simple question. If I am 50, I'm a Bengali woman journalist who's been thrown out of my job.
Yeah.
Can I start in a Facebook thing or a YouTube thing or something, some damn thing, and can I make money off it? Do these buggers pay or don't they pay or do they just bullshit
Well,
around us?
if you're talking of YouTube and all that, you can make a certain amount of money, and the better you are at it, and the more the more useful your content is. One example would be people like Abhisar Sharma and all that.
Hmm.
Got thrown out of ABP, so it's
Yeah,
a classic, regional journalist,
yeah.
and he promptly took to YouTube.
No, you see, that's the problem. These are known faces. I am a 50-year-old Bengali woman who's just a sub editor getting
Right.
a 50,000 CTC. Okay. People don't know me, haven't seen me. So how do I make my life?
Well, look, again, I mean, this whole thing of starting an online profile, whether it is via a blog or whether it is a newsletter that makes sense to people, or whether it is a YouTube channel, a Facebook channel, whatever it is.
Yeah,
One of the things that when you recommend that people do it, the first question they ask is, yeah, but nobody knows me, so who's going to read me?
yeah,
And the only answer I've been able to come up with is, look, nobody knew me either.
yeah.
And when I started writing online, there were very few readers.
But you're an early mover.
Whether you're an early mover or you're moving subsequently or you're doing it, your late career thing, the curve is always the same, right? Initially, a few people find you. If your content is good, they start talking about it. More people find you. There is no shortcut to it. There is no silver bullet.
Hmm, 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 hmm,
You've got to put in those yards to make sure that what you're what you're putting out
hmm. Yeah.
somebody. And if you can do that, I'm not saying that you can replicate what you used to earn before, but you can at least make sure that there is some money coming in. And the additional benefit to that is you do put yourself in the radar of actual media houses who want content.
Hmm, 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 hmm. But you would still advise them to be in journalism in some form. or
I
in
would,
the
I mean, if you've spent 20 years developing a lot of skills, which include writing, being able to edit your own content, building contacts, so that if you want to write about something, you know who to call, and those people will take your calls.
yeah.
Then it seems an incredible. It's a no-brainer that you continue doing that, irrespective of whether at that point somebody is paying you to do it or not.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with you, because I believe in this. I actually believe, hope that most of these people who lose their jobs will also group around, not try to become just individual lone rangers trying to crack their lives. I hope some of them get together, do some great documentaries. India is such a poorly documented country, and I think there is so much to do. I mean, our cities are so poorly covered, our localities are so poorly covered, our food is so poorly covered, our movies are so poorly covered. You know, we in journalism have kind of conveyed that only politics matters, or just the big thing matters, or that only Virat Kohli matters. And I think if people are losing jobs or are going to lose jobs, I hope they do some of these tiny, weeny things, which will give them great satisfaction, if not great money, and fill these blanks which exist in our media ecosystem.
Exactly. We talked about how many times in this how many times during this conversation did we talk about hyperlocal coverage and local coverage?
Yeah,
These
yeah,
people are perfectly positioned for that. And if 10 people join together, that is 10 localities you're covering.
yeah, 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 yeah,
I think one of the problems with journalists is that we're not very collaborative when it comes to doing this kind of work.
yeah.
I mean, why not a collaborative of editors? In fact, somebody who was talking to me recently said one of the single biggest issues that she was facing was that in this work from home thing, the
Mhm.
editorial process has gone for a toss
Yeah,
because
of course.
somebody writing it, sending it an email, the editor seeing it when and if,
Hmm.
sending it back, the playbacks and stuff like that, which happens far more seamlessly when you're actually all of you in a newsroom,
Yeah,
is now getting fragmented.
yeah, yeah,
Uh, there are tons of people with editorial expertise, and there's nothing to stop them from actually putting that expertise on the line and saying, "Look, we'll help."
yeah. Yeah. No, I really wish that organizations like the Indian Newspaper Society, the Editors Guild, the Press Guild of various states, I hope they put their minds together, because I think we also have a social issue among journalists going forward. I mean, I hope to God that not everybody closes down, or that there's not too much job loss. But I mean, I wish there is some safety net that's developed. My good friend Gurbir Singh at the Bombay Press Club, I mean, quite presciently kind of came up with an insurance scheme just a couple of months ago. I wish more press clubs do those, insurance schemes. I mean, this is really required. I think, I mean, I'm not trying to talk like some union leader, but I think we must get some safety net, make people believe that there's a future in journalism. I mean, if we are going to talk like this, you and I, imagine what students must be feeling, or people who are getting into the profession.
Yeah, and you're
So I
teaching
think,
right now at ACJ. I mean, I keep thinking of those students as it is. Uh, when I was teaching there, or when I go for those periodic lectures,
yeah,
when I open it up for questions and answers, the first question that I invariably get is there a future for this profession?
yeah,
And that is before all this happened.
yeah. And
So
your answer would always be yes?
my answer is yes, because I mean, journalism has survived all sorts of things.
Yeah,
The the contours of that future are as unclear to me as it is to the students themselves.
yeah.
But
So you
I'm
believe in it tomorrow?
I believe in a tomorrow. I believe that that tomorrow will come with a tremendous amount of challenges, and I think that those challenges are already apparent. They have been
Yeah.
apparent for some time, and
But you
that
don't. I'm presuming you
I
don't believe in. I don't. I'm presuming you don't believe in the Shekhar Gupta view of tomorrow, right?
no.
Can you
The
repeat that if you
the
can?
tomorrow, well, I mean, I still have no idea how he managed to say that. I listened to it for about 5 times, trying to parse the thought processes that went into that little monologue.
Yeah.
Um,
But it was a good one, good one.
I
I
mean, it was
love that.
brilliant. I mean, the tomorrows that come
I mean,
after.
I think to also be, fair, I think he took it very well, acknowledging the great memes that came out and so on. But I think Shekhar really did a fantastic job, matching two of Karnataka's greatest talents. One is Dr. Rajkumar, who had a song which said, if you come today, it's too early. If you come tomorrow, it's too late. And of course, Swami Nityananda, who, is the other great talent we have thrown up. So I thought this tomorrow, monologue was a wonderful thing. And I think the confusion in Shekhar Gupta's words about tomorrow really reflects the confusion in our minds about tomorrow in terms of journalism.
You just did a fairly decent, open Shekhar Gupta style opener, and that seems to be a good place to leave this one.
Yeah, I thought we should stop somewhere soon. But Prem Panicker, legend in his own lifetime, as they
Oh,
said many times in Bombay. It was wonderful talking to you and sharing your thoughts. Both of us can talk about journalism till the cows come home. I mean, our cows, not the RSS cows. But it was good talking to you and good shooting the breeze about journalism overall. And thank you very much for joining me, Prem. And I'm really
total
grateful
pleasure,
for
KP.
this.
And listen, I'm serious about this. If you're thinking of starting something that on those lines that we talked about just now,
Yeah,
where we work with out of employment journalists, irrespective of language, gender, all of that,
yeah,
and try to come up with some kind of collective solution.
yeah.
Count
You
me in.
know,
Excited to do that.
Prem, if I mean, India at this point in 2020 kind of is so pumped up in its own head, but it seems to be as if our entrepreneurs basically have nothing between their ears. But
Yep.
imagine if you are an entrepreneur with a lot of money. I think you have all the best journalists in the country out of jobs. If you had to start something, with so many people going out of jobs and soon going to go out of jobs, I think this is the best season. So I hope you use some of your own, funds and your
Mine? What?
friends. Yeah, all that stashed away in Cayman Islands and all that. And I hope we come up with something soon, and I hope we see some light.
Yep. Thank you.
Yeah. So I'll see you soon and thank you very much. And I'll
Thanks,
talk to you.
KP.
Bye.
You take care. Stay safe.
Yeah. Bye.